Hi, Doug.
Hi.
How
Hi,
are you?
Pam.
Oh, hey, Pam.
Hi, I
Good
haven't
to
seen
see you.
you in a long time.
Yeah,
Time was in a bookstore, not surprisingly.
right.
Everyone doing okay today?
It's a good chance to see who's gotten a haircut.
Yeah, Pam,
Pam doesn't, right?
Yeah,
But it looks
that's a
really
new style. Yeah,
New old style from the 60s.
yeah,
I'm glad I still have hair.
yeah, very nice. Yeah,
Changed her hair. I wouldn't even have recognized her, Pam Olson.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I do.
yeah, yeah.
So
Um,
I want to thank Doug. I have never stopped thanking Doug for the help he gave me writing the review of my book. And I still, well, we look at it quite frequently because it has all the Chaim people in it.
Yeah, well, I love the stories. And I don't mean to insinuate that we're all getting old, but a writer named Rick Bragg, who I liked a lot, he was in the New York Times and he's written books. But he said the very best books are older folks looking back on their lives. And, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I'm embarking on a new one now. Just in the last 2 months or so, I've agreed to collaborate with Senator Fred Risser on his autobiography.
Good.
So we've done 3 hours of interviews so far, and he of course has quite a story to tell. 64 years he served in the Wisconsin legislature. He's still there. He'll be out in January. But he told a story about going down to Soldier Field in 1944, hitchhiking down when he was 17 to see Franklin Roosevelt, FDR, speak at Soldier Field 10 days before that last election in 44. There were over 100,000 people in Soldier Field and over 100,000 outside.
Wow.
Who couldn't get in. So anyway, I love those kind of stories.
How old was he at that
He
time?
would have been 17.
Wow.
He's born in 1927, so he's 93 now. But
Did
I
he
must say,
say-
really sharp, amazing memory. So it's been fun.
Yeah.
That's great.
Doug, I just wanted to say hi. We haven't seen each other for 1,000 years.
Hi, Barb.
Hi.
Are you still writing?
No, retired way back when, very happily.
Yeah, that sounds nice.
Well,
Ask Fred Risser what he's eating.
Eating?
Yeah, well, you remember Bob and Irwin?
Sure.
Bob and Irwin,
They were
especially Irwin.
vegetarians.
Especially Irwin got, raw kale and all sorts of stuff. It worked.
Yeah.
So, Doug, it sounds like I think everybody knows of you at least, but I did want to, if it's okay with you, I'll just put up, we talked about some of the past writings and some of the future stuff. So I wanted to put it up there just so we can, when we start out talking, people can ask you about all the different, many different projects that you had. So I'm just going to share my screen, I think. Yeah. Okay. All right. So just to recap, I wanted to let people know, and we'll look at the 12 different books because I want people to see all the breadth of the stuff that you've done. And the Madison magazine, probably most people know about. But I will have the links, and most people I think read the columns in the newspaper, but it's just very impressive. It seems like even though it's spread out over 40 years, if you have 4,000 columns and 12 books and lots of articles and contributions to other publications, seems like you have quite a work ethic.
Well, yeah, I mean, it adds up. It's it's funny to think about. You know, I can still remember when I was usually the youngest writer in any publication I was writing for, and
Yeah.
sort of turned around now. But you know, Paul, really, people ask about how, you know, how can you write a book, for instance? You know, it seems so daunting. But the analogy that a lot of authors use is like a cross-country car trip. You know, that seems daunting too. But if you take it, you know, in short chunks, it's very doable. And as for a book author, if I'm able to write 1 or 2 pages of manuscript a day, well, by the end of a year, you know, you've got 600 manuscript pages. So it is true. An author I like named Harry Crews said, you know, he's always asked the secret of being behind his success, such as it was, and he said, get your butt in the chair.
Huh?
It was
Yeah.
pretty simple, you know. And he had this. You might find this interesting. Crews had a rule in his little office, which was he didn't have to write. That like took the pressure off him. But the other component was he couldn't do anything else. In other words, it was just a desk and his typewriter, maybe a few research things, you know. But so he said, pretty soon, if you're just sitting there and you got nothing else to do, you know, you'll start scratching something on a piece of paper and start writing. So
are you recommending I move my home office out of the kitchen?
well, you know, it's funny how often when I haven't followed that advice, how often, you know, floors get vacuumed that don't really need it or something, just because I don't want to transcribe a tape or I don't want to write or for whatever. But
Yeah. So one question about that writing, it seems like I'll in a couple slides to come, I'm going to put your works in progress. And it seems like you've got quite a few balls up in the air. So how do you decide if you're working on more than 1 or 2 books and you're also doing a column? What do you do about that?
that's a good question. What happened, of course, was in 2015, I was let go, frankly, you know, just laid off from the State Journal, which I wasn't alone. There were a lot of other veteran people that were. So I wasn't ready to. I was 59 at the time. You know, I wanted to keep writing, and fortunately, I guess, was well enough known that I was working on a book with Tommy Thompson already. But then I guess, you know, Mrs. Moe helped me set up the website that I have, and through other things, I had people reach out to me for books and articles and that sort of thing. So I was lucky in that regard. As a freelancer, though, my rule was sort of get the work, you know, accept the job, and then figure out how you're going to do it. And I haven't missed many deadlines, but I'm in a spot right now that's kind of interesting, as Paul alluded to. I've actually got 4 books going right now at various stages of completion, along with Senator Risser's book. I'm finishing up a book on Kit Saunders and Nordine, who a wonderful story. She was the pioneer of women's athletics at UW, and actually nationally, she was a major figure. Doing a book on Carl Paul Link, the colorful scientist at UW who discovered warfarin, the blood thinner. And I'm finishing up the United Way of Dane County's 100-year history. They turn 100 in 2022. So, and I kind of alternate, you know, I'll do one and write 30 pages on one and then go to the next one. I'm able to do interviews, for instance, for one book but write on the other one. It's just a matter of focus and gauging time correctly and that sort of thing. And fortunately, other than the United Way book, there's not, which needs to get out by 2022 to make the 100-year. There aren't really deadlines on those. So there's, you know, the people I'm working with would just as soon get it sooner rather than later, but they understand. So far it's worked. A lot of typing, but keeps me out of trouble.
So
This is
that-
Roz. One quick question. With all your prolific writing, had you ever considered a different career?
Boy, I really didn't.
Okay.
I had a lot of different majors in college and ended up as an English major at UW-Madison. But I didn't have debts to pay off, and I was able to actually started freelancing while I was still in college. Sold some articles to Madison Magazine. They had just started Milwaukee Magazine, and was crazy enough to think that I could make a living doing that. And then I got a book deal pretty early. There was a sports agent in Madison named Greg Campbell, and somehow he had as a client, this name may not ring a bell, but Lyle Alzado was a
Sure.
big time football player for the
Yep.
Raiders. And they asked me to collaborate with Lyle on his autobiography. And that's a whole other story about what happened with that. But I made some money, and then within about 6 or 7 years, I signed on full time at Madison Magazine. So really no other career. I wouldn't have been much good, I don't think. There wasn't a lot of other things to do. Maybe a private detective. You know, there's a lot in common with journalism there.
Yep.
And I love crime fiction. So next time around, maybe.
Doug, how do you have room in your head, in your heart for all those characters? I'm looking at Ginny above you on the screen and remembering some of the lines from the story she gave me. One of them was, "Give him my phone number."
Well, you know, as a journalist, that's your lifeblood is, you know, especially like when I was at the Capital Times for 11 years, writing almost a daily newspaper column. You think about that, their circulation wasn't that big. You know, they had about not even a third of the circulation of the State Journal. So I was really dependent on readers engaging with the column and liking something I wrote, and then said, well, he should know about this person, you know, because my friend, you know, XYZ really did something interesting here, and I'm going to let Doug know about it. And that was an advantage of being a columnist. You know, you get your little picture there, and people start to know you. So rather than say, call the city desk, they'd call me. And so, yeah, I could never get enough colorful characters as far as I was concerned.
Right.
Did you ever feel like you hit a dry spell and you had to hit the streets to find some more subjects?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially, there was a time at the Cap Times early when I was writing 6 columns a week because they had 6 papers. And yeah, there were times when I would just go down to the State Street campus area and walk around hoping to find something in the morning. And I remember, and sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't, and it's not pretty. But I remember one time I went down, and it must have been March, because it must have been early 2000s or something, because I remember walking around campus, and the Badgers had just made the Final Four, I think, and they had just won their the Elite Eight game. And I ran into somebody and was asking them about it. And it turned out, I said, were you there? You know, because they had come home from wherever that tournament was. And the guy said, yeah, I was there. I said, yeah, what was it like? And he said, well, I was Bucky Badger. I helped cut the net down. You know, they cut the nets down at the end when they win. And I mean, that was just a fantastic piece of luck. But I had my story, you know. I can't, I guess, say enough how daunting that can be. I think Royko was the one who said the space gets hungry quick. You know, when you finish one column, you don't really get a lot of time to you know, take a breath and enjoy it, because you got to get another one by the next day. So to that end, I don't miss that aspect of it a lot. I'm still writing weekly now for Madison Magazine's website. My wife just put a note down here to say that if you want, we have a list of a couple hundred people that actually, it posts on the Madison Magazine site But we also email it out each week to folks who would like it in their email box on Monday. So weekly is still, you know, that's still a challenge, but it's nothing like a daily column, that's for sure.
So you can, Doug, you can access that like getting the magazine itself or going on this channel 3000, right?
Yeah, the monthly column is in the print magazine. You know, you've all, I think, probably seen Madison Magazine. And I do a monthly piece for them, a profile of somebody.
Yeah.
Like I said, John Hayes, I'm profiling in December. I'm profiling the new school superintendent, Carlton Jenkins, in January. But then each week I do a column for Channel 3000. The Madison Magazine is connected to Channel 3, of course, so it's on their website. So yeah, you can access it on the website, or as I say, if you like to get it in the email, you just let me know, and we put you on the list. There's no solicitations. You just get one column a week.
Doug, is there a certain category of person that you like to write about? For example, politicians versus sports versus cultural versus whatever.
No, I
but
don't think so. One of the things I liked about the newspaper column I wrote in this magazine, one I'm writing now, is that it allows me to be quite a generalist.
okay.
You know, and a lot of times when I'm writing about somebody from sports or politics or whatever, I'll try to kind of find out a little about them that's maybe not what someone who had that beat as a reporter would necessarily concentrate on. You know, you can find out that somebody who's famous for one thing maybe has an interest in something else.
Mhm.
So I was always open to, the key, you know, was, is it interesting?
Yeah.
And the other thing always was, it had to have, especially with the newspaper, it had to have a Madison angle to it. But it was always amazing what you could find, how many different kinds of Madison angles there are in the column that Paul just posted on the screen there a moment ago. That was Madison Magazine, this week's column. And there was a new article in Vanity Fair, in the November Vanity Fair, about the Lion King moving to Broadway, and what an amazing success story that was. Lion King has brought in $9 billion in its
Wow.
theatrical release or receipts across the world. And it had run for 23 years before the pandemic shut it down last spring. 23 years on Broadway. Anyway, it was a West High grad who was the primary guy who got the movie, The Lion King, the animated movie made, and then he was also instrumental in taking it from an animated movie to the stage. And his name is Peter Schneider, and he grew up on Midvale Boulevard. His dad Hans was a well-known mathematician at UW-Madison. We're actually known far beyond here. But Peter was a great story, and he came and spoke to Janan, my wife's class on campus. So I actually got to meet him. And this is many years later now, of course, but the Vanity Fair piece gave me a chance to kind of re-engage, you know. So you're always looking for something to make it timely, and also something with a Madison angle. And in that instance, that qualified.
Do you have to submit your articles for any kind of editorial approval? Or do you just say, here we are, and it's printed?
Peter Schneider is 70, I heard someone ask. To that question, I on the weekly columns, I'm kind of on my own with the Madison Magazine folks, the weekly blogs to the website. They'll edit them. They don't really touch them much ever, but if something doesn't make sense or they got a question, they'll get back to me before it posts online. But with the print magazines, because of their lead time and the fact, you know, I'm working right now on my March or April, I get confused. They're so far out. The magazines have fact checkers And so they will take some time and try to make sure that get back to the sources that I have in the article and make sure that I've quoted them accurately and that sort of thing. I've been pretty lucky because I've been doing it for so long, I guess, that I don't get edited much. You know, a lot of writers will complain that editors mess up their stories and that sort of thing. And I've had some editors help me, you know, which is nice. I've done some editing work myself. I helped Tim Cullen as editor on the two books that Tim has done, the former state senator. He did one on the Walker administration, and then he did one just last year on Janesville and GM. Tim's from Janesville. So I hope I don't dislike editors. I think it's a good collaborative process when it works as it should and usually does.
Doug, if you were to describe your current work, you know, doing the columns and doing the books.
Myself, okay. I have a question for you.
Oh, you can go ahead, Jim.
Yeah. Okay. You write news sorts of articles and biographies. Have you ever tried your hand at writing fiction?
Boy,
is that a totally different world?
Well, I don't know. It's storytelling, Jim, right? I really would like to try to write a crime novel sometime, a mystery novel. I love to read them. I'm actually on retainer with Mystery to Me Bookstore on Monroe Street, which is a wonderful store. I really encourage you to give them your business. Joanne Berg is the proprietor. I do their author interviews and I write their newsletter. The author interviews have all been virtual, of course, since last spring.
So would they have to approach you to say, we would like you to write a novel, a crime novel or something, or would you write it and then try to sell it to somebody?
Well, I think it would be the latter because I don't have any kind of track record. I don't think anyone's going to pay me in advance to write a crime novel. And frankly, that's one of the things. I mean, I'm a professional writer, and I've been able to make a pretty good, you know, not a rich living, but a fine living, you know, writing nonfiction. And you know, so those projects pay regularly, and I really would love to try to write a crime novel. I don't think there's ever been a really good one set in Madison, which is interesting.
But if you did write one, then you would have to try and find a publisher for it. Don't start the other way around. Like when I was younger, when I was growing up, there were a number of magazines that routinely published fiction stories. There were Collier's, Saturday Evening Post, etc., and that general nature. And then there were specialized ones. There was like a whole magazine published like monthly devoted to detective stories or Westerns or science fiction. And authors then, unknown authors, would write things and submit them and try to get them published. And usually they would get printed rejections, you know, just automated printed rejections. But I wrote a story and submitted it, and I got an actual written rejection notice from the editor, going in, which I thought was very interesting. And I guess among the kinds of science fiction fans who were trying to get stuff published, this was considered like a real high mark. You know, it's not quite as good as getting it published, but to get an actual written rejection for your story, as opposed to a generic rejection, was considered something notable.
You know, Elmore Leonard, speaking of great crime writers, he got his start writing Western stories for the magazines that you mentioned.
Kurt Vonnegut, for example, made a big, you know, he started off writing science fiction stories for Galaxy magazine, and then became a well-known general author, you know, of novels.
Unfortunately, the magazine industry, I don't think it's as depressed as the newspaper industry, but it's tough too. You know, there just aren't the markets for stories, or at least ones that pay like there used to be.
I've heard you talk about your wish for so many years at different talks that you've given that I really think you ought to bite the bullet and do it.
Well, the other thing I wanted to try, Pam, was a one-actor play on Mike Royko. I did a illustrated biography of him, but he was such an interesting character. You know, he was syndicated in 600 papers around the world. I mean, so identified with Chicago, but he really had a fan club in Japan. And he was controversial, you know, he had some personal demons, but gosh, he was great. Of course, you'd set that a one-actor play. You would set it in the Billy Goat Tavern in Chicago, which is a famous bar down there, famous mainly because of him and because of Saturday Night Live did a skit. John Belushi had a skit that was centered on the Billy Goat. So yeah, those two projects, a crime novel and that play, are on my wish list for sure.
That would be so great, because I have your book on Mike Royko. I lived in Chicago for 32 years, and he was part of my daily life. I mean, you know, reading his column, and I loved him. I get pissed off at him, and I loved him, and he was so funny and so smart, and I just loved his take on the world. And so that would be great. I would just love that. I thank you for writing that book, by the way. I have it.
Oh, well, it was a thrill for me. Yes, you know, we had the launch party for the book at the Billy Goat Tavern. I mean,
Great.
You know, so I was pinching myself, you know, the whole time. His brother lives in the Madison area, his brother Bob, and so that's how I was lucky enough to get to do that.
I really miss him now. I've missed him for quite a while, and I would love to know what he was thinking now and what he would be writing. And also Molly Ivins, along with Mike Royko. Both of them are sorely, sorely missed.
Agreed on both counts.
So if you were going to do the play, if you were going to write it, you would have to actually become him for a while. How would that be?
Well, right. I mean, I wouldn't be the actor if it ever got to the stage.
No, I mean, you'd have to.
But yeah, no, it would be, it would be in his voice. Now, I've had some practice with that, you know, both my book with Governor Thompson, you know, that's an autobiography. So I was writing in his voice in that book. Another book that I did that came out last year is called Stroke Runner, where I helped a young man an elite athlete who'd had a hemorrhagic stroke, Madison guy at age 36. He very nearly died, but he came back. His name is Eric Sarnow, and he came back to not only survive, but he's become a terrific advocate for stroke and brain injury patients. He helped launch a peer visitor program in the neuro ICU up at UW Hospital. He said, I got the best care in the world when I was there, and he was there a long time. But the one thing I didn't have a chance to ask people who had actually gone through what I was going through. You know, how did they experience it, and you know, what was it like, and all that, and their families, or my family couldn't ask. And so, as I say, Eric started, and now there's like 16 peer visitors that go up, and you don't have to talk to them, but if any patients and families want to talk to a stroke survivor, they can. And but again, that book I wrote in Eric's voice, so I can get Royko down when the time comes, I think.
Yeah.
And there was some talk about a movie, possibly about the book Lords of the Ring. Did that ever?
It hasn't happened yet. Well, that's my book on the Wisconsin boxing program, which the varsity boxing at UW. A lot of people don't realize how big it was. They used to draw 14,000 fans into the field house. If you can imagine, for college boxing, they could put chairs on the basketball floor, and it was wildly popular. And then 50 years ago, in April of 1960, a Badger fighter, it was an NCAA tournament. They had a bracketed tournament, just like basketball. But he went into slipped into a coma after his last bout, and died at UW Hospital 8 days later. And that ended college boxing, not only here, but across the NCAA ended their tournament. That book's been optioned like 3 or 4 times by filmmakers. And an option does not amount to much money. And to an earlier question, I actually split whatever money comes in with the publisher. The University of Wisconsin Press published that book. So being optioned, it's kind of fun to talk about, but there's a long way. And all that option, that means is nobody else can take that material for a movie through the book for a year. The usual option is a year or 18 months. And they'll option it. They may try to get a script. They might try, anyway, a few times, but no, haven't grabbed the brass ring yet on that.
Yeah. Well, that would be an interesting thing, because that would be something. Do you think you'd be working on the script at all? Or?
Yeah, well, one of the producers who optioned it, talked with me about trying to write the script. And the other thing is, would they make it a documentary, or would they do a fictionalized version, a docudrama sort of thing? Yeah, I mean, the problem with that story is that it's pretty dark. This young man who died was just a marvelous, beloved figure on UW campus, 21 years old. He was from the East, but he came here, and there's no way to really find as somebody said about the ending of Chinatown, that great film, they said they found the tunnel. What did they say? Yeah, the tunnel at the end of the light. And movie makers I don't think, traditionally like that too much. So.
This is Roz. Is there a person alive and someone maybe who's passed on who you would have liked to or would like to write their story or meet or?
Yeah, let me think. One way, while I'm kind of thinking, I can answer that question. People always wonder if people are always willing to be interviewed.
Sure.
And the vast majority of people that I have approached over the years to be interviewed have said yes. Now, my stories are generally not very controversial. I tend more to be feature stories, but occasionally there's people that have just said no, not interested. I don't know why this popped into my head, but I got to interview Bob Woodward last year, the legendary Watergate journalist. I did a profile for Isthmus on David Marinus, the great Madison journalist. He splits his time, David does, between Washington and Madison. And one thing you do when you do a profile like that is you not only talk to the person who you're writing about, but you try to interview people who know them, either friends or colleagues. And in the instance of Woodward, he and David were both friends and colleagues. They go back 40 years together at the Washington Post. And it was a kick. It was a thrill for me to, in fact, I've got one of those digital recorders that has 5 different, channels or whatever, what have you. And I think, and so I interviewed Woodward, it has to be 18 months ago or close. I've still got that interview on there. I haven't listened to it again, but I'm not going to erase it, And that's, again, I guess I'm not answering the question about folks I haven't interviewed or that would like to, but certainly the one of the great things about journalism, one of the things that makes me sad that it's in such decline, is what a fun and exciting profession it was to work in. You know, my goodness, I got a chance to talk to people that no way, you know, I would have otherwise had that opportunity. You know, one of my, I guess, best known newspaper columns is the one I did on Lana Peters a decade ago, and she was Joseph Stalin's daughter, and living in Richland Center, and actually approached the State Journal because there was a documentary film coming out about her that she hadn't seen it yet, but she was already unhappy about it, and she almost never gave interviews, but in this instance, she actually proactively requested it. I was lucky that the editors asked me to do it. So I drove up to Richland Center, and it took some, I mean, there was some ice breaking to be done, but we ended up friends, actually. We shared a number of phone calls subsequent to the column being published. And but again, you know, what are the odds of that you're going to get to do that unless you're working in journalism?
Another question for you. I see that the State Journal sometimes publishes longer things, like in serial form, like chapter a day. So back to your crime novels set in Madison, rather than trying to write the whole novel in one lump and getting it published, could you arrange to do a chapter a day in the newspaper?
Or the magazine. I know I would keep referencing Elmore Leonard, but he wrote a novel. I don't remember which one it was, but it was published in the New York Times Sunday magazine.
Yeah.
Maybe 10 issues running. And he also said that was the fastest he ever wrote a book because he had deadlines, you know, like that.
Had to keep up with
maybe maybe that would work. But again, magazines, you know, fiction is just it. You know, as you noted earlier, in the 40s and 50s, fiction paid more than nonfiction in magazines. Collier's, Saturday Evening Post. My gosh, they paid a lot, and they loved short fiction. And for some reason, that paradigm just over the decades shifted. And now the New Yorker has, you know,
the fiction pays really good if you're Stephen King or somebody,
well,
right? So
right.
It goes in big chunks rather than little segments. You know, it's like the rich get richer sort of thing. That if you're an established name, then your works will be published and you get lots of money. But if you're trying to break into the system, and this back in my day, when the magazines were around, this was the way for the unknown to work their way in, and as Kurt Vonnegut, for example, did. And I'm sure there are lots of others, but the one that comes to mind broke in by writing short stories for Galaxy and worked his way up to writing novels became an established writer. But I guess that path has been closed off now with the fall of the magazines and the rise of the paperbacks, that there's just no way to work your way in gradually.
Well, there's you know, websites and things that publish, but it's very fragmented, and they don't pay much generally.
Well, when in the beginning, when you're unknown, but this would be the way. Maybe the web and websites will be the counter to the rise of the big name publisher.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I regularly, not to keep referencing crime fiction, but 5 years ago, a couple of book editors started a website called Literary Hub. It's lidhub.com, and I would encourage you to take a look at it. They were concerned about the lack of print publications doing book reviews.
Yeah.
So they started with book reviews. They've expanded it now. It has reviews, features, interviews with authors. But it was so successful that a couple of years ago they spun off a crime fiction, and it's even more than fiction, but a crime component. It's called Crime Reads, and it's really good. And I'm on their list, so I get an email from them with the latest issue every week or so. And again, I'm always looking at it from a professional standpoint, and I'm just afraid that the pay for writing for these places isn't what it might be. But it's one way to get your name noticed. And maybe
When you do a profile or an article about someone, can they insist to have approval before they allow you to print it?
Good question. They obviously that the general ground rule for when I was in newspapers for sure was that we did not let folks look at a story before we did it or before it was published. We would read quotes back. You know, if you're going to quote me, I'd love to hear what you're quoting me. Okay, fair enough. Now, as I mentioned earlier with magazines, they actually have a fact checker, not me, who will call the profile subject and walk through the story. I don't think they actually send the story itself. Now, I having said that, that's Madison Magazine, one I do the most for. I just finished an article for On Wisconsin, which is the alumni magazine of UW-Madison. It's a really good magazine. It goes to 100,000 alumni around the world. They actually have you send the story once they've edited it and you've got a draft of the manuscript. They have you send it to the people you've interviewed. And it's, I don't mind that. I mean, it lets you know that you're accurate. Now, there's certain kinds of stories. For instance, I'm thinking of Ronan Farrow, who wrote the Me Too stuff for the New Yorker. Well, if he sends that to Harvey Weinstein, you know, Harvey, what do you think? I mean, that's not going to work. But for the majority of stories, that's fine. By the way, the story I did for On Wisconsin, just real quick, a tremendous amount of fun. It was an assignment for me. And they wanted me to write about memorable music shows in campus area locations, clubs, over a 60-year period, and trying to find ones that were by bands that weren't famous at the time and so played to a small group of like 300, 400 people, subsequently became very famous. So I wrote about the Jimi Hendrix concert at a place called The Factory on Gorham Street. There was a club that I hadn't even heard of called Dewey's on Gilman Street. It only lasted 3 years, but Rod Stewart and Faces played there, 300 people. Ronnie Wood was, guitarist. He went on to the Rolling Stones. Fleetwood Mac, Alice Cooper, they all played at this little place called Dewey's. So, and Merlin's on State Street, U2 played at Merlin's. Russ Feingold was one I interviewed. He was at that show in 1981. He was a young lawyer at Foley and Lardner. He said they made us wear three-piece suits at the time. So my friend and I went to Merlin's in our three-piece suits and danced in the mosh pit while U2 played. And then Russ said, 20 years later, I'm a US Senator and I'm the point guy for the Democrats on HIV/AIDS. And who comes in, who wants to see me but Bono, the lead singer of U2, who's now world famous. And he said, my staff was so excited because Bono was a big advocate for relief for HIV/AIDS. They were so excited, I let them in the room. And so Bono comes in and Russ says, well, before we start, Bono, I've got to tell you that 20 years ago, I saw you play in a little club in Madison, Wisconsin called Merlin's. And he said, Bono didn't miss a beat. He broke into Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It was 20 years ago today. So anyway, that story will be out in the spring issue of On Wisconsin. And it was a lot of fun. And my long-winded answer, we sent that to all the sources and they got to make sure that they were fairly and accurately presented in the piece.
One more comment on using the internet for an unknown person to become world famous. Have you heard of Matt Harden and this thing called dancing? He somehow got photographed doing a silly little dance in front of the of some famous landmark like the Eiffel Tower, and they put it on a YouTube sort of thing, and somehow people found out about it and started watching it, and pretty soon he became well enough known that he could just say, I'm going to go to the pyramids next month or next week, give a date and a time. And when he shows up at the pyramids, hundreds of people come out and they start doing his silly little dance. He has a video thing called Dancing. And he's all in places, many places I've never even heard of, but every place I have heard of, he is there leading people doing these dances, even tropical islands, Polynesian islands, or little and big cities like Prague and Brussels, and Paris and France and New York City, and this all around the world called Dancing, and a guy named Matt Harden. Now nobody had ever heard of him before but once he gets started, it snowballs. That the more people saw it, the more people wanted to take part in it, and the more they would show up when he said he was going to be doing this thing somewhere in the world. People from that area would all show up, and he's doing it in Polynesia and in Hong Kong, like almost any place you can think of. There he is leading initially a few dozen and eventually hundreds of people doing this dance together. If you've never heard of it or seen it, just look up Matt Harden and Dancing.
Well, Andy, it wasn't an Andy Warhol, so everyone's going to be famous for 15 minutes. And that was pre-internet, so he was onto something.
Quite a prophecy, quite a fulfilling his prophecy, really.
Exactly.
Speaking about places, I was wondering, Doug, I had this idea sometimes when I started studying a little more about ecology and thinking, if you went into your backyard or somewhere close and really understood what was happening in the soil and everything around it, you'd get taken to all the corners of the world. And I think in some ways, I mean, that's something I notice about your work, is that you're focused on Madison, Dane County in this area, but you seem to get drawn out through following these stories of people to all across the world. And I was wondering if that was, something that you had thought about as you were working, or even before, as you started working with people, that you would learn about focusing even on this fairly, smaller city, that you'd get to know quite a bit about the whole world.
Right, and some universal themes, no matter where you are, really. For some reason, Paul, what popped into my head as you were asking, we mentioned the Kit Saunders Nordine book that I've almost completed. I've only got a chapter left. But one of the really interesting things I found out was Kit was from New Jersey, and she came here in 1964 to get a master's. And women's Phi Ed at UW at the time, women's athletics was pretty sparse. They didn't have much, The Phi Ed department was big on participation, but they really didn't like competition. There was this idea that competing wasn't, good for women for whatever silly reason now in hindsight.
They'd soon compete with men, that's why.
However, they went outside. Kit and a number of her friends in Phi Ed went outside the university and started a field hockey team. And I was able to find through, and there's some marvelous websites that have helped me enormously with my books, called like newspapers.com and newspaperarchive.com, where I can access just all these old newspapers. And I was able to find an article about that Madison field hockey team, these women from 1964. The interesting thing, and the reason I bring it up, is it was fascinating how many, there were probably 10 women listed in the story about this team. At least half of them went on and had really remarkable careers in women's athletics administration. Kit was a prime example, but there was also a woman named Becky Sisley who went out to Oregon and was a women's athletic director out there. I picked up the New York Times one morning last year, the Sunday, and they had a story about the Oregon State women's basketball game between those two schools, drawing 12,000 fans in Oregon. And they interviewed like the first women's athletic director at the University of Oregon. That was Becky Sisley. She played field hockey here in Madison with Kit. And there's other stories like that. That is not exactly what you're referring to, Paul, but it's been one of the fun things for me is to, if they traveled through Madison, they're fair game for me.
Right.
And it's fun to see them go out in the world and report on what they've done subsequently.
I was also picking up on the thing you said about you said not controversial, but one of the things I was thinking about, especially reading, columns and the Goodman book, that, as opposed to not controversial, it seems like what I notice in you is that you're following them. So you're kind of the microphone of the storyteller. So you seem to be the interpreter of their story, and who wouldn't want their story well told? So I think in that way, I mean, I think, instead of you, like Mike Royko or Molly Ivins or something, I see them more as the journalist style, and they're going to do what they want to do with you. And they're going to tell their take on you, and you're telling their person's take on themselves in some ways, and gathering some context.
Yeah, I think that's true, Paul. And even in a larger context, they told Royko had some, and Molly too, I think, had some great storytelling columns, but as often as not, they were stating their opinion, and that's what they were being paid to do. But yeah, I've always been more just trying to tell the story rather than voice an opinion. And I'll tell you what, with the rise of the internet and social media, there's so many opinions out there that the idea that somebody's opinion just because they're in the newspaper is more valuable, I think, has waned. And I also think that, not to really start getting political, but how fractured we are, there's little cohesiveness now in the country. And it always has seemed to me that opinion and commentary divides by its very nature, whereas storytelling unites by its nature. And we've seen a decline in the amount of storytelling and an increase in the opinion commentary segment.
Mhm.
And I don't think that's healthy. And yet it's hard to flip that, because storytelling, it doesn't work on Twitter, so.
Takes a little more attention, I think, too.
Right.
And I did notice that when Dave Zweifel made a comment on the back of your Surrounded by Reality book,
Mm-hmm.
He said, I think what I kind of noticed was that, he said you were uncanny and a great listener, and ability to turn what you learn into great stories for others to share. And what I was, the thing that kind of came to me was, that I do see you kind of more as a storyteller versus a journalist or a commentarian or a columnist in some ways, because I think that I really feel like I get to know people when I read your stories and get a feel. I get a feel, but I get a feel from them through you.
Well, that's the goal, Paul. I don't know that Dave felt all that warm towards me when I left the Cap Times for the State Journal, but
Well,
we got that quote earlier.
You got it in writing on the
and we're friends. I don't mean to say we're not.
Yeah.
But that was a wild time when that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you can name names, but is there someone that you either did an article about or started to where you said, "Mm, putting it mildly, this person is a jerk. I don't want to do it," or maybe I'll publish it, but I really don't want to.
Excellent question, and the answer to that is yes, and it hasn't happened often, and I'm not sure I could bring up a name right now.
Okay.
But there were times, and I don't know that I would if I could, but
Yeah,
and it was especially tough in my newspaper days because I had that space that needed filling, in the
Yeah.
next day's paper. But there were a couple of times at least where I would usually meet people at a coffee shop in those days for a chat where something just did not ring right. Something I didn't believe what they were saying necessarily, or it just something was a little off, and I ended up not following through on that piece. And in at least one instance now that I'm remembering, this individual ended up getting into some legal trouble. So I was glad in hindsight not to have written about him, but it's always, yeah.
so you kind of have that spider sense, that spidey sense of
Yeah.
something's not right.
Doug, we always go to the book fest year after year. This year it was online. It was, kind of disappointing to view things that way, but we went to the interview that you did with Tommy Thompson. And a friend of mine always go to the book fest for years and years and years. And we went because of you, not because of him, because I like to follow you. And he's such a colorful character and probably not my most favorite, but you brought out the warmth in him, and it was a fabulous interview that year at Bookfest. And I don't know, was it last year or the year before? I'm not sure, but I still remember a lot about that interview. And I love the way you pulled out all the good stuff about him. So that was fun to watch.
Thank you. Yeah, that was that was quite a project. I mean, we started that in 2012 or 2011, and the book came out in 2018. So it was hard to get him to sit still long enough to talk into the microphone, But yeah, I did not vote for him. I don't know. I did it on occasion. I can't remember. Ran so many times, I don't remember. But I was after. If you're a Wisconsin journalist and you have a chance to tell the story of the guy that came from Elroy and ended up 4-term governor and in the president's cabinet, I considered that a privilege. And also, again, without getting too political, let's face it, he could reach across the aisle, that cliched phrase now, but Tommy did. He brought in Tim Cullen into his cabinet, a Democrat, his first term. So he was different. I don't know that that would work anymore, which is a sad commentary, but yeah, I like Tommy. Now we joke that since he's now acting president for a year of the university system, we're going to have to add a chapter and do a paperback release with another chapter.
So did you have anything to do with picking the cover picture as him with his thumbs up and with the crowd, and it was just so really captured his personality? Did you have any part in picking that cover picture?
Well, it was my suggestion. I thought.
Right. I loved it.
Yeah, thanks. Much better than a portrait, or something.
Yeah.
I thought.
Okay. Well, we're right at 11:30, so I wanted to give people anybody who has the last question or comment, and also last questions or comments that you might have for us, Doug.
I have a quick question
Sure.
of Doug. I was curious if you've ever done any mentoring of up and coming storytellers or column writers. Do people come and want to talk with you and get your perspective on things?
Yeah, I've always tried to at least go and have a cup of coffee or a beer with people, younger folks that have asked, and I just think that's part of the deal. I mean, I had help as a younger writer, so I hope I've been helpful over the years. There haven't been all that many, but there have been a few, and one was a young guy named Garth Beyer, who he wrote his college paper on me, and he was in journalism, and I made such a profound impact on him that last year he opened Garth's Brew Pub on Monroe Street. He got out of journalism. But he actually works in public. He works for Heaving, the public relations group. His brew pub is fabulous. It's like I say, it's on Monroe Street. Of course, they've had this horrible situation now, because he had just opened for a few months and it was very crowded and it's successful, and hopefully it will be again. But
It was great to see you again.
oh,
You
thanks,
mean a lot to me.
thank you, Pam. Yeah, I enjoyed this a lot.
Next time I'll make you take me to a bar instead of a coffee shop.
I like that idea. That's good.
And your spirit of having fun, I think, comes through when you talk about your work. And I think that's probably another, thing that draws people to reading the columns and the books, is that you're looking for something that's exciting, that's fun for you, that captures your attention, and it does the same for us too. So we're getting that.
Well, thanks, Paul. I've enjoyed it this morning. Good to see everybody.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank
coming.
you for joining us. Excellent talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Everybody be well.
Yeah, everybody stay well.
Hey, well,
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Okay,
Paul.
bye, everybody.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thank you
Paul.
guys for coming.
Thanks, Doug.
Yeah, and thank Mrs. Moe for getting the living
Oh,
room
you bet.
conference room set up.
Thanks.
very impressive.
Yeah, worked out good.
Yeah.
Okay, take
Bye-bye,
care, everyone. See some of you on Monday.
Bye-bye, Paul.
Take care, Jenny.
That was great.
Yeah.
Trump
good.
is saying he's winning and there's just a lot of fraud.
All right. Well, we're gonna have to get the report from you tomorrow.
Oh, well, hopefully they're getting down to the
I think you'll do okay, Lauren.
last of in Georgia.
Yeah.
And